Can we go a week, just a couple of days, without some big giant big tech company or some crazy psychotic open source organization doing something that drives me bonkers? Can we do that, please? This week, Apple released an update to macOS 15, macOS 15.1. And with that release, they have made it even harder to run unsigned applications. So you got to get your application signed by Apple for most people, average people, to be able to actually run their applications on macOS 15.1. It's absolutely asinine. This is all part of big tech's bigger war against sideloading, which also makes me angry, and I think I've ranted about 15 million times in the past, but it's just getting worse. I've just posted this article up over at the Lunduke Journal, lunduke.locals.com, and I'll read it to you now. Part of it to you anyway, because it's incredibly frustrating. On Monday, October 28th, Apple released the macOS 15.1 update, and with that update, Apple has ratcheted up their war on sideloading, I hate that word, by completely disabling the ability to run unsigned macOS software. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an overstatement. It's effectively disabling the ability to run unsigned macOS software. The vast majority of users will never realize it's even possible, and there's significant problems with you doing some kind of funky workarounds to make... Anyway, we'll get into that in a moment. I should also point out that signing software, also known as notarizing software in macOS Apple parlance, of course requires an Apple Developer Connection subscription, which for most people is a costly thing and is also just very, very annoying. So just a little over a month ago, at September of 2024, the initial release of macOS 15.0 brought with it a new round of restrictions on running non-signed, non-notarized applications. With 15.0, users could still run this non-notarized software, but they needed to jump through a few extra hoops by opening the system settings and manually enabling each application they wanted to run. But it was still very doable, right? It was still fairly straightforward, and there were little settings that popped up when you tried to open it, and you could just click OK and make it happen, right? So, but this change made running unsigned software on macOS a bit more annoying, right? In 15.0, they made it harder, more annoying, additional steps to do something that used to be a simple double click on the darned icon process, right? You remember when we had a piece of software and you wanted to run it and you went click, click, or enter, or command O, or whatever it was on your operating system of choice, and it just ran? Yeah, Apple's trying to make that harder. Annoying, right? Annoying for sure, but luckily, all software could still be run, and it was very obvious how to accomplish running the software in 15.0. Annoying, but doable. That all changed less than 45 days later. So they make it really annoying. And then 45 days later, as Apple released the 15.1 update to macOS, which included the removal of the click around in the system settings options to allow unsigned apps to run, right? So they went from annoying to now in 15.1, when you attempt to run a non-notarized piece of Mac software, you're greeted by a simple error message. The application finder does not have permission to open null. Right? It doesn't have permission to open this application. We don't have permission for it. It's just not going to do it, right? You're just not going to run, right? So no option to run the software whatsoever. None at all, at least not as far as the user can tell. And it looks to the end user like the software is broken, right? It looks like the individual applications are somehow all busted, or perhaps the entire operating system is broken, but something seriously is going wrong. And this effectively is banning all non-signed software, such as those developed by, hobbyists. Someone who doesn't want to fork out hundreds of dollars for developer connection subscriptions and the like, right? This is not cool. This is not cool. We've been able to develop software and do whatever we want with it and run whatever software we want on our computers since we've had... I digress. Let's talk about sideloading for a minute, because this is ridiculous. So this isn't exactly a surprising move by Apple. right? Over the last few years, all of the big tech operating system companies, Microsoft and Apple and Google, have pushed with increasing intensity to lock down what software users are allowed to run on their computers, increasingly restrictive application signing systems, and the removal of features, sideloading features, which allowed non-signed applications to run. These have been a stated goal of all three corporations for quite some time, and this is all in the name of a war on what big tech has termed sideloading. Now, what is sideloading, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. Sideloading is most simply defined as the act of installing software on a real computer. You know how you would have a computer running DOS or macOS or Amiga OS or Linux or whatever, HPUX, and you get a piece of software and then you run it? That's sideloading. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. And that Apple, Google, and Microsoft are determined to stop people from doing exactly that. They want to control the means by which you run your software. It's insane. Now, these companies haven't exactly been quiet about their goal to stop people from installing software on their computers outside of approved, heavily restrictive mechanisms like the macOS App Store or the Microsoft Windows Marketplace or what have you. Now, back in 2021, Apple published a white paper. It's a real thing. I provide a link to this so you can go read it in the article. A white paper, a whole PDF, entitled Building a Trusted Ecosystem for Millions of Apps, a Threat Analysis of Sideloading. This is from October of 2021. A threat analysis of sideloading with pictures of bugs with little skulls on them all circling around an apple, right? So like sideloading is bringing death. So listen, to be clear here, Apple considers having the freedom to install whatever software you want on the computer that you own, the one that you bought with your dollars. Not that you have a subscription to, not that you bought a license to, but that you went and bought the physical hardware of. Something every real computer, including those made by Apple, have done since the dawn of personal computing to be a threat. They consider installing whatever software you want to be a, quote, threat. And they say it over and over again in that white paper, and it's insane. It's insane. It's just crazy. So with macOS 15.1, Apple is taking a significant step to neutralize that threat. No software freedom for you, right? I mean, forget about having open source software. Forget about having free software so you can see the code. No. I'm talking about just the ability to click and run my software. They've gone to the point where they take that freedom away. Forget the 4 freedoms of free software. We need freedom -1, the ability to actually run a piece of software, because Apple and Microsoft and Google do not want you to have that freedom. And it's insane. It's nuts and it's awful. Now, I did say that there's a little caveat here. There is a workaround. As of now, with macOS 15.1, there remains one final way to work around these absolutely draconian, insane, and artificial restrictions. To do so requires the complete disabling of something called Gatekeeper, the system which verifies downloads and restricts the running of non-signed applications. So this can be done via a fairly simple terminal command that you run as root. And I give it on the screen there. It's sudo spctl --master-disable. Now, however, you just enter your administrator password and you're effectively done after a reboot. But I want to warn people on this. It should be noted that with Apple's ever-increasing requirements of application notarization and increasing reliance on the Mac App Store for software distribution, which in turn ties into Gatekeeper, the full disabling of Gatekeeper seems likely to cause issues going forward with Apple-approved methods of installing software. That just seems likely. Apple is assuming that you have to have Gatekeeper, right? They don't provide a GUI to disable Gatekeeper. They just don't anymore. And they want to make it very clear that it's a critical part of your system. And if you're getting different applications as part of your Mac, purchase, whether it's the Office suites or iMovie or whatnot, or Xcode for developing software, you're getting all of that 99% of the time through the Mac App Store. Gatekeeper which is tied directly into Gatekeeper. So you turn off Gatekeeper. I don't know what's going to happen long term. Right now, for the most part, most things keep working okay. That seems likely to change very quickly because in the last 45 days, we've gone from it's annoying to run non-signed software to you have to jump through multiple hoops in a terminal using a terminal command that Apple tries to not tell you about in order to kind of make it sort of start working. That's pretty rapid progression down the we don't want you running anything unsigned outside of outside of the Apple ecosystem for like the App Store and whatnot, right? That's rapid progression there. So at Apple's current rate of attacks against sideloading, the ability to turn off Gatekeeper, in addition to all that, may not be long for this world all by itself. So forget about the fact that turning off Gatekeeper over the next several releases may result in stuff just not working well anymore. But I think the idea that they'd make it so you can't turn off Gatekeeper, at least not easily, well, that just seems likely. It just seems likely, and that kind of sucks, but I mean, realistically, looking at where Apple's going, looking at their stated objective of essentially neutralizing the threat, their words, of sideloading or installing software, of course they're going to go down that road. So we're right at the end game here. We're right at the finish line, right before the finish line of you no longer get to install software on your Mac. We're right there. It's real hard to do. And the few ways to do it are likely to be ripped away from you very, very quickly. That's the place that we're at. Now, I want to preface everyone by saying if you are a Google or a Microsofty sort of person, you shouldn't be laughing right now. Well, the news today is focused on Apple, their fight against the most basic freedoms of computing, the ability to run whatever software you damn well please. Both Microsoft and Google have made it clear that they are all in on the war against sideloading. Case in point, Google is migrating Android software away from APK application packages to the far more restrictive AAB application bundles. I provide a link so you guys can go look into that. Microsoft likewise is pushing for a reliance on their online store. And look at it this way. How hard has Microsoft been trying to make it for you to just install a non-Microsoft OS on hardware with TPM v2? One thing after another, these systems are getting progressively more locked down. By design, the hardware is getting more and more locked down. The software is getting more locked down. The operating systems are not allowing non-signed applications with an increasing frequency. It's getting intense. So users of Android and Chrome OS and Windows shouldn't laugh. You're next. This is and not far off either. It's all coming for all of them. Now, I should say that users of a variety of open source operating systems, alternative operating systems like Linux and FreeBSD and OpenBSD and some of the various Amiga OS open source systems and Haiku and many others, those users can laugh all they want because they can still run software on their systems without it being signed. That's a win. That's a win for those systems. Now, like I said, though, a lot of those operating systems, those alternative open source systems are going to increasingly have a harder and harder time installing on a lot of these hardware put out and with Microsoft hardware in it, like the TPM, those pesky trusted platform modules. It's not a great scenario all around. It's not delightful. So there we have it. That's where we're at as of right now. Now, what happens from here? Because I'm seeing a lot of backlash to this, right? A lot of backlash is coming out. Some people think Apple will pull back on this, and maybe that's true. Maybe Apple will issue a 15.1.1 where they go back to the old 15.0 way, where it's just a little annoying to run non-notarized software, but you don't have to jump through so many hoops. You don't have to disable Gatekeeper and things like that. And maybe they will. Maybe they will do that. Maybe Apple's smart enough to backpedal on this one a little bit, because it's not going to make people happy in the long run. However, Apple has been out here for years now, repeating and yelling and beating their chest from the top of a mountain about how much they hate, they fear the threat of sideloading. Now, as long as we have that happening, as long as Apple is saying that one of their major concerns in life is that people can install whatever software they want on their computers, I don't see them backing down from this. Because the reality is, I don't think most Mac users are going to stop using a Mac because they can't install whatever software they want. They're just going to complain a lot, and that'll be that. I mean, that's the reality. That's the harsh reality. What are they going to do? I don't think Apple's market share is going to tank because of it. Apple's been has locked down iOS forever, since the beginning, and they fight tooth and nail. Even when they're legally compelled to open up iOS, they fight against it. They do not like it when a system is open. And Google and Microsoft are the same way on that nowadays. Microsoft used to be very, very different. They used to be, you can run whatever software you want. And then again, Apple was that way too. You could run whatever you wanted on your Mac in the olden days. It was yours. And you should feel in love with your Mac. And you should run whatever you want on your Mac. And you should customize the UI on your Mac. You remember when you could do that? You can't do that anymore. Not really. There's some tools out there that let you get kind of a hackneyed way around it, but man, do they get janky in a hurry. Apple used to straight up provide you with the tools to customize the look and feel of your Mac, appearance managers and extensions and everything else, and removable control panels. It was a wild time. And you could run whatever software you wanted, with hot swappable batteries, with systems where you could upgrade the RAM and the hard drives, and shoot, do you remember old Mac laptops where you could pop open the keyboard and pull out the Wi-Fi card and put in a new one? Yeah, they're airport cards. You had modular systems. Old Mac laptops used to have hard drives and floppy drives and CD-ROM drives that you could literally pull on a tab and they would shoot out. System was still turned on and you could hot swap them in. Well, some of them were hot swappable, not all of them, but you could remove them without any screws. It was amazing. The old MacBooks and iBooks, you could take out the battery with a quarter. It had a little knob where you could just turn a little knob with a quarter and out pops the battery. You could slap in a new one. The Apple of today is nothing like the Apple of old. They're not the same company. They don't have the same ethos. And the same is true for Microsoft. The Microsoft of today, compared to the Microsoft of old, the Microsoft of today is a gigantic 40-foot tall super demon that breathes fire and venom. Like it is so much worse of a company in terms of restricting the freedoms of users, of computer users. I really do mean it. You know, I think a great deal about the freedoms we have when using our computers. And I know, you know, people like Richard Stallman have talked a lot about the 4 freedoms of free software. And what's amazing is those 4 freedoms that Richard Stallman promotes at this point are almost irrelevant, because the freedoms that are being taken away from us when we use our computers are even more fundamental and basic. And Apple and Microsoft and Google are at the front lines of making sure we don't have those freedoms. The freedom to put whatever OS we want on our hardware. Microsoft and Apple are adamantly against that. TPM and everything else, man, they fight tooth and nail to make sure we don't install different operating systems. Even if it's theirs, they don't want us to install it. And Apple and Microsoft and Google are working hard to find ways, sometimes inventive, ingenious ways, to restrict our ability to run whatever software we want on the operating system that we have on their system, theirs or someone else's. They don't like it. It is a threat. They view it as a threat. That's horrifying. That's a horrifying reality to be in when all the major operating system vendors, the major ones, are out to stop us from using our computers the way we want to. And they want to force to use the system the way they want us to use it, right? We don't have a choice in the matter. Even it's not a matter of us simply saying, to us choosing to use the system the way they want it to or not. They want to make it so we don't have the choice. It's sort of like buying a car and not being allowed to change the hubcaps. You're not allowed to change the hubcaps. Can't change the hubcaps. You can't put seat covers on the seats of your car. If you don't like the seats, it's too bad. You can't put seat covers on. You can't change the radio. That's the radio that's in it. That's the one that will always stay in it. And if you change it, your entire system starts working. Your car won't start anymore. Right? That's the point that we're at with these major operating system vendors. And it's disappointing because they weren't that way. These computer companies, they were founded by nerds. I mean, Apple and Microsoft, come on, they were founded by nerds. Whether you liked the nerds or disliked the nerds, whether you liked their methods of doing business or not, and I've had some complaints about both of them. They were nerds. I mean, when Steve Wozniak was building out the Apple and the Apple II, he wasn't sitting there thinking to himself, but what if someone tries to run a piece of software I don't like? How can I stop them from running that software? What if someone tries to launch a piece of software in a way that I didn't create? Well, I have to find a way to stop them from doing that. What if someone tries to launch a piece of software in a way that I did create, but I don't want to use anymore? I have to find a way to stop them from doing that too. Wozniak was never thinking along those lines. Honestly, Gates wasn't thinking along those lines either. As much as I'm not a big fan of Gates. I'm not a big fan of Bill Gates. Been yelled at by Bill Gates, and I don't even have it coming. I'm not a big fan of Bill. But they weren't thinking along those lines. They were building systems for people to use. It seems strange that that's not the case anymore. It seems very strange. This is something that deserves to be shouted about. This deserves to be something to be talked about a great deal. We have all sorts of crazy news happening all this week that's going to drown out news like this, most definitely, and rightly so, I suppose. But this news of Apple locking things down and other companies doing it as well, this needs to be talked about more in the weeks and months ahead, because we cannot allow this to continue down this road. It doesn't lead anywhere good. Thank you to all the Lunduke Journal subscribers. Go to lunduke.com. There's all sorts of links there, podcast links and article links and video links and different places where you can watch things all over the internet. And there's pluses and minuses to all of them. And it's fantastic, and ways that you can support the Lunduke Journal. And thank you to those of you who do. You make it possible for this sort of coverage to continue. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.